Hello and welcome to another episode of Make a Space Sim in Unity. In this tutorial we're just going to kind of clean up our ship controls and player inputs and maybe do a few other housekeeping things, make some of the space background a little bit better and add some space particles, some dust to kind of make it you feel the motion a little bit better. So yeah, so let's get started. Okay, so I think we'll just start with the changes to the player input. So let's pull up our player input script. So you'll find that on your player manager if you've been following along before, but the player input script here. Okay, so the player input script, we have it should look pretty close to what we had before, but I added an extra event here. So it's called slide event, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in a second. But slide event is basically allowing you to get rid of kind of inertial dampening. So when you have inertia on at all times, it's kind of makes the controls a little bit hard and floaty. And so the last time I left you with controls where the inertia was totally on, so if you put your ship into forward thrust, you just keep going. And even if you let go, your ship would build up enough momentum so you'd overshoot anything that you were maybe planning on getting to. So we're going to fix that. So the first thing we want to do, though, is it's cool to have the ability to have inertia built up, so you can do kind of like a strafing move and things like that. So adding a slide input, kind of like I think Freelancer did it with the spacebar, will allow you to use inertia and do those kind of cool inertia moves, and then still maintain control if you want to. So yeah, I think that's the main change that I'm going to show you here. So this is all you do. So you just add an event, just like all the other ones. Event input event float slide event, and then down inside the keyboard input, you just want to type if slide events not null, just like previous ones. And then I have two things here. So this is important because we want to basically toggle slide on and off. So if the slide button, if we get the slide button, that's going to return a bool of positive. That means it's being held down. And then we're going to fire off the slide event with a input of 1. And then if the slide button is up, so get button up, that means we've released it. And it only happens for that first frame of release. Then we're going to send that slide event again, but with a 0. Okay? So get button means we're holding down the spacebar, and get button up means the first frame that we release it. And if we do these two things, if we check for these two things, we'll be able to toggle the slide on and off. Okay? So that's what we're doing here. And the last piece of this input is, okay, well there's two more things, but you go into your project settings. So that was edit, project settings, and then go to your input. And then where you see jump on here, just rename it slide. So you'll see fire 1, 2, 3, and then jump. Just change it to slide. That's grabbing the spacebar. Okay. So just add that in here. And if you want to make your own, you just name it slide and add a positive button for space. And it's just a key or a mouse button, not an access. Alright, so you need a slide input there. Alright. Okay, so once you have that, then you go over to your ship and you have your rigid body. One thing that I did here was I added drag to the ship, and by adding the drag it will slow down the ship, so we won't have this kind of floaty, out of control type feeling when we add thrust and things like that. So you'll see here my drag is set to 2. I think angular drag was already set to 3. So if we press play, I'll show you. Well, let's press play here and I'll show you. So the ship just kind of comes to a stop. Alright, so we have drag on there. Now, the last piece of this, so update your rigid body, and then you want to open up your ship controller. Alright, so now we want to add another event here. So at the very top in Start, you're going to add a player input slide event, and then plus equals enable slide. So just like all these other events, we're adding a new one, slide event, enable slide. And then, yeah, okay, so you need to do that. And then there's that piece. And then for our function, it's right here. So you just make a private or a public enable slide with a float for slide. And then if the slide is greater than 0, we're going to set the rigid body's drag to 0, or else we're going to set the rigid body drag to our original drag. Okay? And that's all we're doing there. And you'll see at the top here, right under the my rigid body, I added a float variable, public variable for original drag. And then when right after we get our rigid body component in the start feature, I have the original drag equals my rigid body drag. So if you do those things, you'll have a saved version of your drag from when you start. So if you set it in the inspector, you'll be able to just grab it at runtime here, and that way when we set our drag to 0, we can always set it back to the original drag that we had calibrated our ship to. So if in the future you want to change it, you don't have to have a set version inside this ship controller. Alright, so that is everything that you're going to do for adding a slide ability. Okay, so you need an enable slide function, you need your slide event, and you need to be able to save that original drag here in the start so that you can set it here. Alright, with that, you'll see if we, so now I've got my regular drag ship, and I'm stopping. Now if I want, I can hold down spacebar, and now I'm strafing. So if I tried to do that same maneuver with drag, 1, I go a lot slower, but 2, I can't really strafe around very well, right? Whereas this will allow you to strafe. Okay, so that's kind of a cool feature to add. Plus, with the drag on, it allows you to kind of make your ship a little bit easier to control. Additionally, I think I bumped up the thrust power here to 10,000. When drag's on, it makes it harder to push the ship, so you might want to bump that up as well. Okay, so that's that. The other input piece, okay, so I guess let's just do the particle system real quick. So the other thing that I did was inside the ship component, the player ship component, we have our model here, we have our camera as well, and then I added another particle system. So let me bring this up here so you can see it. Okay, so it's almost the same exact particle system as the one I used to make the stars, but it has a few things that I've changed a little bit. So I've got the duration set to 10,000 or something like that. I have it looping. I set the start lifetime for the particles to 4, and then the start size is just 1. I just want all these particles to be pretty small. Alright, and then this particle system, it's just like the star field, so we don't want it to be moving or anything like that, so don't add any starting speed or anything like that. Make sure those are all 0. And then the simulation space, not simulation space, yeah, simulation space, set it to world. Okay, and what that will do is that will spawn these particles in the world, and they won't drag along with your player ship, even though the particle system is attached to the player ship. They'll just be dropped into the world, and then they'll stay in place, and you'll fly by them. Okay. what else? Let's see. Okay, max particles, I think I kept this the same. It's like 10,000. Rate over time, 1,000. And then down here, we have a sphere. And you can see it. It's a pretty big sphere. It's 500 meters. And I made the radius 0.5 thickness. And what that does is, you'll see this kind of little center sphere in the middle here. No particles are going to spawn there, but they're going to spawn all in this big kind of outer ring around the player. And that way you don't have like particles really close up just kind of popping into existence. So just have a 0.5 on the thickness, and you'll see on I made a change to the star field as well, where I think I put the thickness down to 0. So if you put the thickness down to 0, it goes all the way out. So it's just on the edge of the sphere, but we can make this have a little bit of volume to it, so just not right up in front of the player. And again, these are to spawn in the world, so they're not going to be sticking with the player. You're going to fly by them. Everything else I think is generally the same. The other trick for these kind of local particles that are going to be flying by the player is color over lifetime. So up here I have this set to the star color set to just regular white, but color over lifetime, you'll see I have it set to have a little bit of alpha invisibility, same at the end here. So that way it fades kind of in and out. So how you do that is you can, every time you click, you can add new pieces here. So if you click on this one, so at the top of this is the alpha, and right now this is set to 0. Okay, so if it looks black on the arrow, that means the alpha set to 0. That's basically invisible, and you can scale it all the way up. But you want this one to be all the way down to 0, and actually you want this one to be, this one at the end here, to also be at 0. And then on these ones, I set them all to 255, which is just solid. So it's going to kind of blend right into solid, stay solid for a long time, and then at the very end it's going to fade out. And you probably don't even need all of these, you probably just need one here and one here. Let's see, yep. And then these ones at the bottom, these control the color. So if you wanted your space dust to be brown or something, you could change this and make all the space particles brown or something. I'm going to keep mine at white though. Alright. Okay, so color over lifetime, and that's it. So the renderer, it's just the default particle billboard. Nothing special at all. So these are just particle dots, and they're stuck to the player ship. Okay, and you'll see. Let's see if we can watch it go. So what's going to happen is these particles last only 4 seconds, but they just fade in and out. And you can see how little they are, and they just follow the player. But it gives you that feeling that you're flying through space. You've got motion. It's kind of hard to tell when you have big spaces and maybe you don't have a lot of things around you. So this is how I do the space dust. I'm sure there's more performant ways than having a particle system, but this is a quick and easy way to do it. Alright, so that's that particle system, and I guess while we're on the subject, let's go into the background particle system. I made some adjustments to this one. So this is our background stars, and you'll see, if you look closely at the background stars now, they're kind of blue and orange, and they're kind of far away. They're not like big puffy things in the middle. The last couple videos you probably saw some really close-up ones. So similar to our space dust, but this one is not attached to the player. It's inside our background. I changed the starting colors to gradients. So if you go to this little arrow here, you can select random between 2 gradients, and so that's what I did. And then I created these gradients here for the top one and the bottom one, so I get 2 different colors. I changed the start size to a range as well, and you can do that at random between 2 constants. I just made them between 1 and 3. They're still pretty small, and they're out in the distance. Simulation space can be local for this one. I think the other change that I made was I may have increased the radius of this sphere to farther out, and then so 300, and then I set the radius thickness to 0. That way it only spawns on the edge of the ring of the sphere, so they're distant stars. And that's it. I guess I have color over lifetime for this one too. I think they're all solid. So that's kind of the main thing I did to change this one. And remember, this is part of the background, so it's part of the skybox. You can always ask me a question in the comments if I wasn't clear here. I know I did a bunch of stuff here in advance because I was trying to cram in a bunch of stuff into this and wrap up our skybox and controls tutorial so we can get on to some more interesting stuff. Okay, last thing I wanted to show you with the controls. Okay, so this is an event-based input system, so it kind of makes it easier to create all different types of inputs and things like that. So I wanted to show you another piece of this that you can set up to make your input system even better. So I have this enemy ship here, and I'm going to place them in the scene here. And now this enemy ship is set up with a version of our input system. But the input system that it's using is based on an interface. So what that means is I can take any script that has a interface, the controller interface, okay, can be used to control a ship, right? So this, instead of having a player input script, this enemy has a sample AI script, and this script uses the controller interface. So, and you'll see it still uses a version of the ship controller, and it's flying on its own. So it's flying kind of the same, using the same things as the player ship, but using a different input system. So it's just picking random spots and flying around. So, okay. So let me show you how this works. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an interface. Okay, so an interface is just basically a contract of data. So anything that has an interface is going to implement certain features that are described in the interface. The interface doesn't contain any logic or anything. It just says, here are the things that are going to be in this class that has my interface. Okay, so I took the stuff out of our event manager class where I was kind of storing these public delegates here, the input event and input event float, and I just put them in this interface. And then we have an interface here, so public interface, and then I call it iController input. Okay, this doesn't need any Unity scripts or anything. And then inside here, we just put these events. Okay, and if you look in your, if you want to copy and paste, go into your player input, and you just grab these, just paste, copy them, and paste them into your input script, and then you just need to delete your event manager and just have the events here. So I have an extra one called fire event, and this one actually doesn't have our slide event. Okay, so so very simply, you just write event, input event float, and then slide event, right? So you create this interface, and that's now going to be how we get our input values from whatever input script we're using. So I'll show you the sample AI. So this is basically a version of an input script. So now I have an error. Okay, so one of the things that happens, so this is supposed to be using the iController input script. Okay, so basically how you do that, you just, in your public class, you add right after mono behavior a comma and then your interface. Okay, and an interface makes it so that you must implement whatever features are in the interface. So you'll see here I have an error now. I have a red line. This won't compile now because I added in my interface a slide event. Okay, so now I have to update my sample AI to at least have the slide event in here. Okay, I don't have to do anything with the slide event. Okay, we might choose not to use slide event for the AI. It might be cool to watch an AI use sliding, but we don't need to actually implement it. We don't need to actually use the event itself in our logic. We can just, but we need to put it in our script, so it needs to be here. The reason being is that our ship controller is going to look for it, okay? Because it's going to be using the iController input. So by having an interface, we're guaranteeing that all of these events are going to exist on any input we drop on a ship, okay? So any spaceship now that we want to control in any way, we can say it's going to pull from this iController input, okay? And so we've added the slide event. We don't have to add this to our AI, but the AI does similar things to our player input, right? We're doing thrust, we're doing yaw, we're doing pitch here. It looks a lot like the player input. In fact, I copied and pasted a bunch of it to go here, and it just does a little AI. We can talk about AI in the future, but all it's doing is looking for a random place to go, and then it uses the same things to control the ship that the player does. Okay, so let's convert our player input to our input controller interface. Okay, so all you do is you go into your player input. After mono behavior, you type iController input. Okay, now we're going to get a warning because we haven't implemented any of the members of our interface. Mainly, we have them being derived from this event manager. So we're just going to delete these, the event manager reference. In fact, I'm probably going to just delete that script for now. I think we'll actually have an event manager in the future, but right now we don't need it. Okay, so now we have all the events converted to our iController type events, but we have an error. So if you look up here, it says we don't have a fire event. So it's because we have not implemented firing. So okay, and so this is actually an event that doesn't take a float at all, so it's just an input event. Alright, so we've added that. Now our interface is happy. Okay, we've just converted our player input to a iController input. Okay, so it's deriving from this interface. It has all the things that our ships are going to expect. Alright, we haven't done anything else to the script. All we've done is gotten rid of the reference to the event manager and added our interface. But now we've created a contract, so our ship controller is going to be able to look for anything with an iController in it, and it will use it. So, so the way that you set this up is you go to ship controller, and at the top here you have player input. Instead of player input, see, that's a specific coupled input. Now this ship only works with players, okay? But we want to generalize that because maybe you're going to jump out of the ship and run around, and your AI co-pilot's going to fly the ship. Or maybe your ship is gigantic and you can walk around in it, and your pilot's going to fly the ship while you're doing something else. We want to be able to make sure that we can swap out how the ship is being controlled, or how any ship is being controlled in the game. We might have different styles of inputs that we want our players to have, so maybe we'll make a controller script in the future, Xbox controller, something like that. Maybe that's a different input class, okay? As long as they derive from the interface, we'll use it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look for an interface instead. So instead of looking for player input, we're going to look for the iController script, iController input script, and we'll call it player input. That way we don't have to change anything here. All right, but instead of looking for that specific class, we're going to look for this interface, okay? And any input script that has this interface will work now, basically, with this script, because this script is looking for these events on it, okay? The other tricky thing about this is now I can't set this in the inspector, so we need a way to grab this this script for this ship. Okay, so there's a couple ways to do this. You could say, okay, well, I have a pilot or a controlling entity or something like that, and that is going to be where I find my input. Okay, so how do you do that? You just say, we'll create a, so this actually doesn't need to be public because we're not going to be able to see it, but public, and this will be a game object, and we'll call it pilot. Okay, so this pilot could be an AI, or it could be itself. It could be self-referencing. It doesn't really matter as long as the pilot has the input script on it. Okay, so then in our start file, we're going to say pilot, or we're going to say player input equals pilot dot get component, and then we go iController input. Okay, so now we can still set this in the inspector, or we can set a pilot at runtime, or when the player gets in the ship, however you want to do it, but it's got to grab this. And we could do some checking, like if pilot, I guess. Although I feel like if we don't have a pilot, then we're going to crash, because all this other stuff is going to fail. So you might want some more defensive programming here in the future, but so if we have a pilot, we'll do this. Okay. Yeah. And so we're going to set the pilot in the inspector, so we're not going to worry too much about this, but yeah, let's give me a... Sure. Just let me do it. There we go. Okay. Alright, so now we're checking for a pilot, and we're going to get this. So how do we do that? So let's go back to our ship. Okay. And now we have to... Okay. So you'll see here there's a empty pilot thing. So you'll see here we have our player input script. So if we just drag this in here, we'll get our player manager will be our pilot. Okay. And our enemy script now requires this too, okay, because it's, well, this is the, yeah, okay, we can actually, remove this one. Okay, so the enemy script now needs a pilot as well, so it actually has the AI right attached to it, so we'll just drop itself into the pilot. Okay, so now it's going to find this interface on it, okay, and yeah, so now hopefully this works. So let's see. So we have our new updated scripts. I saved everything. Sure. Okay. So let's see what happens. Okay, so my mouse works, and I can fly through my new dust field. And my AI is running away. Yeah, it might be a little broken. It looks like it's flying, it's missed its mark and it's flying out forever. Yeah, we're not on that tutorial yet, so I just threw that together to demonstrate the ability to have different inputs. Okay, so now if I let go, I'll stop. If I build up some steam and I just... Inertia. Okay, so yeah, so that's how you put together an interface for your controls, and then you can kind of swap out how ships are controlled and things like that, whether it's your different input devices or if it's your AI that's controlling the same ship, so you can have a bunch of different ships and allow players or AI to control them without having to create separate versions of enemy ships and player ships and things like that. I think that's a pretty cool feature to be able to have. Yeah, and so I think we'll stop that tutorial, here, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I think we'll probably still do some more input in the future, but I think we're going to move on to some other features. maybe some lasers and damage in the next tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed this, and please like and subscribe to the channel so you get the updates for when the next tutorial comes out. Thanks a lot.